Project Sunflower by Hoopy McGee. Chapter 5 First Steps. Erin stepped forward through the doorway, bracing herself as the feeling of the ground underneath her switched from concrete to grass. The dim light of the lab gave way to natural sunlight as she glanced around excitedly. This was it, Pony World. The location she was in looked nearly identical to the gentle hills and green grass of the first pony picnic she had seen. She glanced around quickly. There were no native ponies around, fortunately. It would be awfully hard to be inconspicuous if any of the local ponies had seen her step out of a hole in the air. The environment around her seemed just as peaceful and idyllic as she had hoped it would be. It was warm, though not oppressively so, the Pony&Wolf sun gently warming her back as she stood in this new world. A mild breeze rustled the grass and the hairs of her mane and tail. The air itself smelled clean, fresh. It reminded her of the fields behind her aunt's farm in Nebraska, far away from the smell of cities and humanity. She closed her eyes and breathed deep, some of the tension melting from her as she let the alien sun warm her body. This place was so peaceful and serene. It was like, "Erin!" A voice bellowed suddenly in her ear. She screamed, nearly jumping half out of her skin in shock. "Erin, can you hear me?" The voice continued.
"Yes, Dr. Welchiek, but can you turn the volume down? You nearly blasted my head off with that."
"Oh, sorry. How's this?" The voice coming through the implanted speaker in her ear lowered to a much more acceptable volume.
"Better," she said. "I'm here, in Pony World. It's amazing."
She bounced excitedly on her hooves, giddy with excitement. "I can see that, my dear. We're getting very good data. We've got the transmitter going full stream right now, gathering live data from all your implants. So far, so good. The information is coming through beautifully. It's as we expected. Pony World is astonishingly like Earth."
"Yeah, it's really beautiful here. I don't think I've ever seen grass this green before."
"Speaking of that, Erin," Dr. Welchiek said, interrupting. "If you don't mind, could you take a little nibble?"
A nibble?" Erin replied, confused. "You mean you want me to eat some of this grass?"
"Very much so, if you don't mind. The sensors in your stomach will give us data on the chemical and biological makeup of it as you eat it."
Well, I suppose that's what I'm here for."
With a sigh, she lowered her head and gave the grass between her hooves a tentative bite, then started chewing.
Actually it's not as bad as I thought it would be."
She swallowed the few blades of grass she had been chewing. "Glad to hear it. Erin, as you see new plant life, I strongly encourage you to take a sample of it. The data would be invaluable. And remember, even if it tastes awful, it can't hurt you. You can eat nearly anything organic, remember?"
"Yeah, I remember. Hey, I think I'll eat this flower now. It looks like a daisy."
She chomped down on it and started chewing. It was actually kind of tasty. "That's the spirit. I'm going to close the doorway now."
"Wait, what?"
Erin said in a sudden panic, spraying half-chewed daisy from her mouth as she swirled around just in time to see the harmonics lab behind her blip out of existence. She felt a cold wave of panic wash over her. She was stuck here now. No way back, for better or worse, completely cut off from— "Erin, can you still hear me?" Dr. Welchiek asked.
Yeah, I can hear you."
That was the second time he'd managed to scare her.
"I thought you closed the connection."
"I closed the two-way doorway between worlds, yes, but I wanted to see if one of the smaller doors would be enough to allow us to still communicate. It's less obtrusive that way."
"Oh, I see."
"Yes, see, the wavelengths between worlds matching up to such an extent that we can create a large doorway between worlds is very rare, and it also requires a lot of energy. Smaller ones, like the one I'm simulating now, come along maybe once or twice a week. I was afraid we'd be waiting weeks before we could collect more data from you."
"Oh, well, yay, I guess,"
Erin said, still feeling a little abandoned. Why don't you wander around, my dear, and see what you can see? We've got some time before this window closes, and I want to be sure that we utilize it as much as possible."
"Oh, sure, of course." Erin tried to put out of her mind how exposed, alone and vulnerable she felt on this alien world, and began trotting across the landscape, picking a direction randomly. She looked around herself in fascination. This really didn't look any different from Earth. Small hills, the occasional crop of trees, a large, spooky-looking forest off in the distance. Well, okay, the creepy forest was a little different, but otherwise it was a lot like where she grew up. As she walked, Dr. Welchiak would stop her and ask her to take a bite out of some local plant life. In short order, she had eaten another daisy, some dandelions, some thistles, and a wild rose, being very careful not to eat the thorns. It was during this roaming vegetarian smokesport that she heard the sound of running water in the distance, and decided to make her way towards it. She finally found a small stream that gurgled its way along, and Erin trotted up to get a closer look.
"What a lovely little stream," Dr. Welchiak said in her ear, and Erin shuddered at the reminder that even the things she saw were being transmitted back to the harmonics lab. It was more than a little creepy. "Could you drink some of the water, please?" Dr. Welchiak continued. "For the data?"
"Oh, sure."
She lowered her head and took a gulp. She quickly learned a very valuable lesson. When you wade into a shallow stream of water to take a drink, make sure you drink from upstream and not down. Her hoofs had steered up silt from the bottom, and she got a mouthful of it.
"Bah! Ugh, gross, it was all muddy."
"That's wonderful, Erin. Now we have water and soil samples."
"Wonderful, he says, but he's not the one with the grit in his mouth,"
Erin muttered, rolling her eyes. "You know that I can hear that, Erin."
"You are meant to,"
she shot back. His constant demands of eat this and nibble that had already been starting to get a little annoying even before she had sucked up a mouthful of mud water. Still grumbling, she rinsed out her mouth with clean water, spat, and then stomped back to the bank and clambered up onto the dry grass. She looked around, totally lost, then randomly decided to walk upstream for a while. She found her irritation dwindling rapidly as she walked, however. She was unable to hold on to a bad mood, as she found herself enjoying the feeling of her muscles stretching and warming up from the exercise while simultaneously the sun warmed her coat. It was a picture-perfect day, and it was nearly impossible to be in a bad mood when it was this beautiful out. Erin sighed, the last of her bad mood dissolving, as she walked through the idyllic Pony&Wolf countryside. She had missed this, she suddenly realized, simply being outdoors and walking in the sunlight. This was the first time she'd even seen the sun for around 2 months, or rather an alien sun that was indistinguishable from the one on Earth. First, she had been locked away from the rest of the interns while she waited to be converted into a pony. Then she was unconscious for a month. Then she was locked away for nearly another month while she practiced in indoor tracks with her new body. They hadn't let her outside in order to keep her a secret. This was her first time outdoors as a pony, and much to her surprise, she loved it. She grinned impulsively, feeling the sudden need for a little mischief. She started at a trot at first, and then broke out into a wild gallop. She sped along the ground at a breakneck pace, noticing that having her eye line closer to the ground made it seem like she was running even faster than she really was, which was honestly pretty darned fast already, and much faster than she was capable of as a human. She started laughing with pure joy as the grass whipped by under her hoofs, ignoring Dr. Welchiak's voice buzzing insistently in her ear. The landscape of Pony&Wolf became a new obstacle course. She rounded bushes, jumped smoothly over depressions and rocks, climbed hills, and would suddenly cut in random directions as the whim took her. Her new, enhanced pony body responded beautifully, making the physical effort feel like nothing at all. All she felt was the sheer exhilaration of running. She reached the top of a hill and leapt as far as she could, and for a moment she felt like she was flying.
Landing, she skidded to a halt and glanced back the way she'd come. She couldn't see the stream anymore, or any other familiar landmarks. She wasn't sure how long she'd been running, but it only felt like a few minutes, and in that time she was pretty sure she had run for miles. She was barely even sweating, and wasn't even breathing hard. "I love this body," she thought joyfully. Finally, Erin sighed and decided to acknowledge Dr. Velchiak's frantic questioning in her ear. "Sorry, Dr. V," she said, feeling slightly averted. "I just suddenly realized that I'd been cooped up indoors for weeks and decided to take the new body for a test run. It works great, by the way."
"Well, that's wonderful, Erin," he replied, sounding stern. "But please keep in mind that we've got lots of testing to do and a short time to do it. I'm not saying you can't enjoy yourself from time to time, but at times like this, when we actually have a window open, we should really concentrate on testing."
"Yes, Daddy," she thought, but out loud she said, "Oh, okay, sorry, I'll be good," and secretly resolved to have as much fun as possible while still accomplishing her mission to save both human and pony kind. Smiling and thoroughly pleased with herself, she took off towards a grove of trees she saw in the distance. She moved at a brisk trot, still enjoying the sense of health and well-being this body gave her. As she got closer, she noticed that there were apple trees, heavy with bright red fruit, nothing but apple trees, as far as she could see. "Wow, neat, apple trees," she said, trotting up to them.
Yes, they do look remarkably like apples. Do they seem like normal apples to you?" Dr. Velchiak asked.
"Yeah, they look perfectly like normal apple trees."
"Interesting. There must be some sort of parallel evolution between our worlds to allow for so many similarities. You will, of course, be eating one of them, right?"
She stretched her head out towards a low-hanging fruit and then shook her head. "This looks cultivated. Doesn't that mean it's someone's orchard? I don't know the laws here. I want to get along with other ponies, so I probably shouldn't start out being a thief." Whatever Dr. Velchiak said in reply was drowned out as, at the same time, another voice said,
"You got that right, Sugar Cube."
Erin eeped and jumped in surprise. There was a native pony trotting around from behind a tree, not 10 feet away from her. She had a light orange coat and blonde mane and tail, and she was wearing, of all things, what appeared to be a cowboy hat on her head. She had 3 apples on her flank and spoke with what sounded to Erin like a southern accent. Erin felt a moment of panic. She wasn't ready for this. She tried to remember the cover story she had come up with and realized her memory was a complete blank. What was she supposed to say? This pony had an accent. Should she talk in an accent? She'd probably sound stupid if she tried. Would this pony attack her for trespassing? Was she going to get in trouble? She didn't want to go to pony jail. The strange pony smiled at her and said, "I can appreciate folks being honest, though, so as a reward for not stealing an apple, how about I just give you one for free?" What? Erin scrambled mentally as her train of thought derailed. Okay, thank you. I'd really appreciate that." Erin grinned nervously back at the other pony. She could hear Dr. Velchiak's excited breathing in her ear and found herself wishing with some irritation that she could mute him somehow. She didn't need a distraction from him right now. This was first contact with alien ponies. The pony walked up to the tree Erin was standing by, turned and tapped it lightly with a rear hoof. A single apple fell out of the tree, which the strange pony had butted towards Erin. Acting on reflex, Erin snatched it out of the air with a snap of her jaws. As her teeth crunched into the apple, the juices ran into her mouth and her eyes widened in shock. She quickly ate the whole thing, core and all, in a couple of bites and some noisy chewing, much to the stranger's apparent amusement. "Well?" she asked. At the same time, Dr. Velchiak said breathlessly in her ear,
"How does it taste? Does it taste like an apple?"
Erin swallowed and answered them both at the same time. "That was, quite simply, the most delicious apple I've ever eaten in my entire life."
"Well, now, that's mighty kind of you to say, missy," the strange pony said, laughing warmly. "Even though I know it's true, it's sure nice to hear some pony else saying it. I'm Applejack, by the way."
"Oh, Erin thought quickly. Applejack. She had 3 apples on her rump, so did pony names and their tattoos have something to do with each other? In that case, she'd need a name that reflected her own. She blurted out the only thing she could think of. Sunflower. I'm Sunflower. It's nice to meet you. Aaron smiled back at her warily, waiting to see if the name seemed at all weird or wrong to Applejack. Her fears were quickly laid to rest, though, as Applejack came up, somehow clasped Aaron's right forehoof in both of her hoofs and began shaking it vigorously. "Mighty nice to meet you, Sunflower. You have gone and wandered into Sweet Apple Acres, best apple orchard in all of Equestria. I don't reckon I've seen you around here before. You new to Ponyville?" Ponyville? Is that the nearest town? Aaron shook her hoof slightly. It had gone numb from the shaking. How strong was this pony?
"Yup, you'd be able to see it if you were on the other side of the farm. So what brings you to these parts?"
"Oh, well, I'm just exploring, I guess. I want to meet new people, see new places. I want to learn as much about Equestria as I can, you know," Aaron said, glad she was able to tell the truth about that much at least.
"I can understand that. Why, when I was a filly, I thought it'd be a good sight better to live in Manhattan. Of course, I soon figured out that I belonged here, at home, and ain't never looked back. But I reckon you gotta see those sights when you can, so you can remember what's so important about home. So where you from originally?"
Aaron considered for a moment. Equestria, Ponyville, and Manhattan. Horse-themed names seemed pretty common here. She briefly considered saying she was from Mainopolis, just to see if that would work, but then she thought it would be better not to lie. A lie could unravel and undermine any attempts she might make to integrate with pony society. Better to just withhold information, when possible, until she learned enough to fake it more convincingly. "I'd rather not talk about that, Applejack," she said, shaking her head. "I mean, if that's okay with you. I can't go back there now, anyway."
"Oh, I see," Applejack said, looking sad. "Trouble at home, then?"
"You could say that," Aaron said, thinking of the black tide.
"Well, I won't pry, but if you're looking for a place to settle down, then I reckon you won't find anywhere better than Ponyville. How about we celebrate your arrival by having you join the Apple family for lunch? I was about to head back anyway, and if you're heading to Ponyville, it's in the right direction anyway."
"Oh, well, I wouldn't want to impose."
"Shucks, it ain't no imposition. Granny always cooks up a heap of victuals more'n we can eat. Anyways, come on, then."
And with that, Applejack trotted off. Aaron stood there for a moment, feeling awkward and afraid, but then finally shook herself and started after her. As she trotted along next to Applejack, she couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement about being in the company of a non-human intelligence. She kept glancing at her companion out of the corner of her eye. Applejack was a little bigger than she was, probably about 2 inches taller at the shoulder, and heavily muscled to boot. She smelled slightly of sweat and dirt, but not offensively so. Not like a pony that hadn't been washing, but more like a pony that had been working hard all day out in the sun. As she watched the pony move confidently through the orchard, Aaron felt a little worm of shame nibbling at her soul. She hadn't technically lied to Applejack. Well, not about anything other than her name, at least. But she had been raised to know that a lie of omission, or intentionally telling the truth in a way that would be interpreted incorrectly, was as good as telling a lie. She sighed, hoping that it would all end up being worth it. She could only do what she could after all, and it was unlikely that Applejack would be the last pony she'd have to deceive.
"Aaron, listen,"
Dr. Velchik whispered in her ear as if he was afraid Applejack would overhear. Aaron tensed and tried not to show any reaction on her face.
"We're about to lose this window. You'll be on your own in a moment, but you're doing great. You've already given us tons of valuable data, such as the real name of this world, but there's so much more to learn. Remember to take care of yourself and keep a low profile. You'll be—"
There was a crackle, and Dr. Velchik's voice cut out. Aaron shivered. She really was alone now, completely, totally cast off in an alien world. The natives seemed friendly enough at least, but it was still frightening. She thought about her first night at college, off in a strange town, and on her own for the first time in her life. This feeling was familiar to that, but much, much more intense. At least then she could call her parents if things got too bad. But now she was in a world where she didn't understand the rules, and she had literally nobody to fall back on should things get rough. She should have been terrified, and in truth she was scared straight down to the tips of her hoofs. But she was also excited, she couldn't deny it. It was a few minutes after Dr. Velchik's voice had cut out that Applejack stopped suddenly, looking into the sky.
"Well, would you looky here,"
she said, with a look of both amusement and annoyance on her face.
"Looks like we're about to get some company."
She waved a hoof in the air and shouted,
"Howdy, Rambo-Dash."
Aaron looked up and saw a light blue winged pony with a surprisingly prismatic mane and tail, turning in the air and starting to descend rapidly in their direction. "Wow, a winged pony," she said, forgetting for a moment that Applejack was standing right next to her. She started glancing over at her orange companion guiltily to see the look of confusion on Applejack's face.
"Sunflower, you ain't never seen a Pegasus pony before?" she asked.
Oh, Aaron's thoughts scrambled briefly, and then she decided that the half-truth option she'd been following before would probably continue to work. "No, actually. Where I grew up, there weren't any—" Aaron faltered briefly. What was the plural of that? Pegasuses? Pegasi? She decided to skip it. Just regular ponies, kind of like you and me."
"Really? No unicorns or Pegasi, just Earth ponies?"
Applejack's eyes were wide with surprise. Aaron's heart skipped a beat at Earth pony before she realized that Applejack probably was referring to a type of pony like the Pegasus's type. She shook her head no, and was about to try to elaborate when the pony Applejack had referred to as Rainbow Dash landed in front of them with a flourish. Aaron stared in complete awe. "Cool," she said, amazed. Rainbow Dash looked startled for a moment, then grinned and puffed out her chest, wings spread wide. "You know it. Hey, Applejack, who's your friend?" Rainbow Dash's voice was rougher than Applejack's, though still obviously feminine.
"Rainbow Dash, this is Sunflower. Sunflower, this is Rainbow Dash,
who somehow seems to always manage to be just casually passing by when it's about time for the Apple family to take a break and eat lunch." "Yeah, that's an amazing coincidence, isn't it?" Rainbow Dash said, covering up the blatant lie with an air of complete innocence that Aaron couldn't help but chuckle at. "Does it mean that you're on your way to lunch now?"
"Yup, and like always, you're welcome to join us, along with Sunflower here, who apparently ain't never seen a Pegasus before."
"What, seriously? What kind of backwater village did you come from where you've never seen a Pegasus?" Rainbow Dash was looking at Aaron in shock. Aaron cringed, flushing red, and looked down at her hoofs. Was this where everything came crashing down? Had she already told a lie that would unravel everything and expose her? Ponies where I'm from are very different, I guess you can say. It's one of the reasons I left home. I mean, I'd heard about unicorns and Pegasi, but I'd never seen them in person, and I wanted to." She kept staring at her hoofs. There was no way that would go over, would it? Any second now they'd catch on, call her out, probably run her off.
"I think I've heard of that," Applejack said. "Places where a group of Earth ponies all get together and try to do things on their own, without no help from unicorns and Pegasi. Going it alone, if you see what I mean."
"Yeah, but who does their weather for them?" Rainbow Dash asked, then shaking her head in confusion and adding, "It doesn't make sense."
"Now, Rainbow, Sunflower's my guest, and she already said she don't want to talk about her hometown. I don't want you pester her about with a bunch of questions she don't like answering, got it?"
"Yeah, but—"
The light blue Pegasus cringed back from Applejack's sudden glare.
Okay, got it. Sheesh, I still think it's weird, though." "Does it help if I do, too?" Aaron asked. Applejack guffawed at that, and Rainbow Dash chuckled after a moment. It was then that Aaron heard a clanging sound in the distance.
"Come on, y'all," Applejack said. "That'll be the dinner bell. Race you back to the farmhouse."
Applejack took off running, and Rainbow Dash grinned and ran after her. After a moment of hesitation, Aaron smiled and ran after them. She felt buoyant, almost like she could float through the air through sheer relief. The earlier fear of discovery was gone, or at least greatly muted. The first hurdle had been passed. She was on her way to being accepted into pony society. Next, she needed a job and a place to stay. Her stomach growled noisily, in spite of the sparse vegetation and the apple she had munched on earlier, interrupting her train of thought. "Correction," she thought as she ran. "First lunch, then a job and a place to stay." She started laughing as she chased after the ponies ahead of her.